Maria pressed her face against the cold train window and watched the endless white landscape roll by. Snow covered everything as far as she could see. Her stomach twisted with fear and excitement. In just 2 hours, she would meet Thomas Mackenzie. For the first time, it's the man who had agreed to marry her based on nothing but letters and a single photograph. She looked down at her 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, who was curled up asleep against her side. Little Miguel, only 4 years old, was playing with a small wooden horse that his grandfather had carved for him before the war came to their village. It was one of the few things they had managed to bring with them. The train car was nearly empty now. Most passengers had gotten off at earlier stops in bigger towns. Maria pulled out Thomas's last letter and read it again, even though she had memorized every word. His handwriting was neat and careful. He wrote about his ranch in Montana, about how lonely he had been since his wife died 5 years ago, and how he was looking forward to having a family again. "The winters are cold here," he had written, "but the house is warm, and there's always plenty of food. Your children will have their own rooms and can go to school with the other kids in town. I promise to take good care of all of you." Our Maria folded the letter carefully and put it back in her coat pocket. She had read similar letters from him dozens of times over the past 6 months. Each one had given her hope that maybe, just maybe, they could have a real life again. The war had taken everything from them. Her husband died when a bomb hit the factory where he worked. Their house was destroyed a month later. For 2 years, she and the children had lived with her mother in a tiny apartment, surviving on whatever work Maria could find. But when her mother got sick and died last winter, Maria knew she had to do something desperate. That's when her neighbor told her about the marriage agency. "Women write to men in America," she explained. "If they like each other through letters, the man pays for the woman to come, and they get married. It's a chance for a new life." Maria had been horrified at first. Marry a complete stranger, a move to a country where she barely spoke the language. But as she looked at her children getting thinner each day, wearing clothes with holes in them, she realized she didn't have many choices. She spent her last few coins on paper and stamps to write to the agency. They sent her 3 different men's information. 2 of them seemed cold and demanding in their letters. But Thomas was different. He wrote about missing his wife, but not wanting to replace her. He talked about wanting to help a family that needed help, and how he believed people could learn to care for each other over time. "I won't lie to you," he had written in his 3rd letter. "I'm not looking for a love story like in the movies. I'm 42 years old, and I've already had that kind of love. But I believe in kindness, respect, and building something good together. If you're willing to work alongside me to create a peaceful home for your children, then maybe we can make this work." Something about his honesty touched her heart. He didn't make impossible promises or try to sweep her off her feet with fancy words. He just offered her exactly what she needed most: safety and a chance to build a future. The train began to slow down, and Maria's heart started beating faster. The conductor walked through the car calling out, "Glacier Falls. Next stop, Glacier Falls." She gently shook Sophia awake. "Come on, sweetheart. We're almost there." Sophia rubbed her eyes and looked out the window. "Is this America, Mama?" "Yes, baby. This is our new home." Miguel looked up from his wooden horse. "Will the man be nice to us?" Maria smoothed down his dark hair. "I think so. He promised he would be." But even as she said it, doubt crept into her mind. What if Thomas had changed his mind? What if he took one look at her tired face and thin body and decided she wasn't what he wanted? What if he was kind in letters but mean in person? She pushed these thoughts away and focused on getting their things together. One old suitcase held all their clothes. A small bag contained their important papers, birth certificates, her marriage certificate, photos of family members who were gone now. And hidden in the bottom of the suitcase was her mother's wedding ring, the only valuable thing they had. The train jerked to a stop, and Maria's stomach dropped. Through the window, she could see a small wooden station building covered in snow. A few streetlights created yellow circles in the darkness. It was 11 o'clock at night, much later than Thomas had expected them to arrive. The train had been delayed for hours because of the weather. "Will he still be there, Mama?" Sophia asked, pressing her nose against the window. Of course he will, Maria said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. They gathered their bags and walked down the narrow aisle to the door. The cold hit them like a slap the moment they stepped off the train. It was colder than anything Maria had ever experienced. The wind cut through their thin coats like they were made of paper. The train station was tiny, just a small building with a few benches outside. Maria looked around desperately for Thomas. She had sent him a photo, and he had sent her one too. He was a tall man with brown hair and kind eyes. But as she scanned the empty platform, she didn't see anyone who looked like him. Maybe he's inside, Sophia suggested, her teeth already starting to chatter. They hurried to the station building, but it was locked. The sign on the door said the station closed at 10:30. Maria knocked anyway, but no one answered. She stood there holding Miguel's hand while Sophia pressed close to her other side. The wind howled around them, and snow began to fall harder. Where was Thomas? Had something happened to him? Had he forgotten about them? Miguel started to cry. I'm cold, Mama. I want to go home. But they didn't have a home to go back to. Everything they owned was in that one suitcase. They had exactly $3 left after buying food on the train. Not enough for a hotel room, not enough for train. Tickets back, not enough for anything. Maria felt panic rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. The children were depending on her. She had to figure something out. She spotted a small, covered area next to the station building, where people probably waited for trains in bad weather. It wasn't much, but it would give them some protection from the wind. Come on, she told the children. Let's wait over there. Mr. Thomas probably got delayed by the snow too. I'm sure he'll be here soon. But as they huddled together in that tiny space, watching the snow fall and feeling the temperature drop even more, Maria began to wonder if they were going to survive the night. Maria watched the clock on the station wall. Through the frosted window, midnight came and went. Then 1 o'clock. Her breath made small white clouds in the freezing air, and she could no longer feel her fingers, even though she kept them tucked. Inside her coat sleeves, Sophia had stopped shivering about an hour ago, which scared Maria more than when she was shaking. She knew from the harsh winters back home that when someone stopped shivering in the cold, it was a very bad sign. She pulled her daughter closer and rubbed her arms through the thin coat. Tell me about the warm house again, Mama, Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. Maria's heart broke a little more. She had told the children so many stories about their new life based on Thomas's letters. The house with a big fireplace, the kitchen that was always warm, the soft beds with thick blankets. Right now, those stories felt like cruel lies. Well, Maria began, trying to keep her voice steady. Thomas wrote that there's a big stone fireplace in the living room. When winter comes, he keeps it burning all day and all night. The whole house stays cozy and warm. Miguel lifted his head from where it rested against her shoulder. Will there be soup, Mama? Hot soup? Yes, baby. Lots of hot soup, and fresh bread, and milk that's so cold and sweet. She kept talking, painting pictures with words of the life she had dreamed they would have. But with each passing minute, those dreams felt further and further away. What if Thomas had changed his mind? What if something terrible had happened to him? What if this was all some kind of mistake? A late train pulled into the station around 1:30, and Maria felt a spark of hope. Maybe Thomas had been delayed and came on this train instead. She watched through the window as 3 people got off. An elderly man, a young woman, and a businessman with a fancy coat. The businessman looked in their direction and frowned. He walked over to where they were huddled. Excuse me, miss. Are you all right? You can't stay out here all night with children, Maria tried to explain in her broken English. I wait, ... for man, he come for me, Thomas Mackenzie. The businessman shook his head. Lady, nobody's coming at this hour. You need to find shelter somewhere. There's a boarding house about 6 blocks that way, but I don't know if they'll have room. 6 blocks. Maria looked down at Miguel, who could barely keep his eyes open, and Sophia, who was so cold she had curled up like a small animal trying to stay warm. They would never make it 6 blocks in this weather, and even if they did, she didn't have enough money for a room. Thank you, she managed to say. The businessman shook his head sadly and walked away into the night. More time passed. 2 o'clock, 2:30. Maria found herself making bargains with God. Please, she prayed silently. I don't care what happens to me, but please don't let my children freeze. They're good children. They don't deserve this, she thought about. All the decisions that had led them here. Maybe she should have stayed in their homeland and found another way to survive. Maybe she should have written to one of the other men from the marriage agency, the ones who lived in warmer places. Maybe she was a fool to trust a stranger's letters, but then she remembered the last winter in her mother's apartment. Miguel had gotten so sick from the cold and poor food that she thought she was going to lose him. Sophia had stopped playing and laughing, becoming quiet and sad like a much older person. They were slowly dying there, just in a different way at least. Here, she had tried to give them a chance. Around 3 o'clock, she noticed that Sophia's breathing had become very shallow. Panic shot through her. She shook her daughter gently. Sophia, wake up, sweetheart. The little girl's eyes fluttered open, but they looked unfocused. I'm so sleepy, Mama. Can I just sleep a little? Maria knew they were in serious trouble. She had heard stories of people falling asleep in the cold and never waking up. She had to keep the children awake somehow. No sleeping yet, she said firmly. Let's play a game instead. Let's count all the snowflakes we can see. There are too many, Mama, Miguel mumbled. And let's sing. Remember the song Grandmama used to sing? The one about the little bird? She started singing softly. An old lullaby from her childhood. Her voice cracked from the cold, but she kept going. Sophia joined in weakly, and even Miguel hummed along. The familiar melody reminded them of better times, of being warm and safe, but singing made them use energy they didn't have. After a few songs, they all fell quiet again. Maria tried to think of other ways to keep them warm. She took off her own coat and wrapped it around both children, even though it left her in just a thin sweater. She showed them how to move their fingers and toes to keep the blood flowing. She told them more stories, asked them riddles, anything. To keep their minds working, a police officer walked by around 3:30, making his rounds. Maria waved at him desperately. He came over, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Ma'am, what are you doing out here with these kids? Maria tried to explain again, but her English got worse when she was scared and cold. The officer looked confused and concerned. Look, I can't leave you here, but the shelters are all full because of the storm. Let me make some calls, see what I can do. Walked away, speaking into his radio. Maria felt a tiny bit of hope. Maybe help was coming. But 20 minutes later, he returned with bad news. I'm sorry, ma'am. Every place I called is full up. Storm brought in a lot of folks needing shelter. The best I can do is give you these. He handed her 2 small hand warmers, the kind that heat up when you shake them. It wasn't much, but Maria was grateful. She gave one to each child and watched as a little bit of warmth returned to their faces. Is there anyone else you can call? Any relatives or friends? The officer asked. Maria shook her head. Thomas was the only person she knew in this entire country. The officer looked troubled, but there wasn't much more he could do. He promised to check on them again in an hour. 4 o'clock came. Then 4:30. Maria was fighting to stay awake herself now. Every part of her body ached from the cold. Her thoughts were becoming fuzzy and slow. She knew these were dangerous signs, but she had to stay alert. She was all her children had. She started making up stories in her head about Thomas. Maybe he was sick and couldn't come. Maybe his truck broke down in the snow. Maybe he was out looking for them right now, driving around town trying to find them. She created dozens of explanations that didn't involve him abandoning them. But as the night dragged on, hope was getting harder and harder to hold on to. Just before 5 o'clock, Sophia whispered something that made Maria's heart stop. Mama, I can't feel my feet anymore. Maria's world had become very small. Just the tiny space where they huddled together, the sound of wind howling around the station building, and the constant fight to keep her children awake and breathing. She had stopped looking at the clock, because each passing minute felt like torture. Sophia's feet had gone completely numb, and now Miguel was complaining that his hands hurt. Maria knew this was actually a good sign. Pain meant there was still feeling there. It was when the pain stopped that she needed to worry. She was rubbing Miguel's small hands between her own when she saw something that made her heart skip. Light was moving in the distance, getting closer. At first she thought it might be a car, but the light was too small and moved too slowly. As it came nearer, she could see it was someone carrying a lantern. Her first feeling was hope. Maybe it was Thomas finally coming to find them? But then fear crept in. It was almost dawn now, and most people weren't walking around with lanterns at this hour. What if this person meant them harm? She had heard stories about dangerous people who looked for helpless travelers. The figure got closer. Maria could see it was a tall man in a heavy winter coat. He walked with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going. When he was about 20 feet away, he stopped and held up his lantern to get a better look at them. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "All right over there?" Something about his tone made Maria feel a little less afraid. He sounded concerned, not threatening. But she still held her children closer.
We
wait," she managed to say, her voice hoarse from the cold and hours of trying to keep the children awake. The man came closer, and in the lantern light, Maria could see his face. He had kind eyes and a worried expression. He looked to be in his 30s, with dark hair sticking out from under a wool hat. "Ma'am, you and your children have been out here all night. I live just up the hill there, and I could see you from my window. I kept thinking someone would come for you, but—" He shook his head. "You can't stay out here anymore. You'll freeze to death," Maria tried to explain, but her English felt even more broken than usual. "I come... for man. Thomas Mackenzie. He write letters. He say he marry me." The stranger's expression changed immediately. He set down his lantern and took a step back, like she had hit him with something heavy. "Thomas Mackenzie," he repeated slowly. "Yes. You know him? He live here. He has a ranch." Hope flooded through Maria's chest. Maybe this man could take them to Thomas. Maybe there was still a chance everything would work out. But the look on the stranger's face told her something was very wrong. He ran his hand through his hair and stared at her for a long moment. "Ma'am, this is going to be hard to hear. Thomas Mackenzie died 3 weeks ago." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She felt all the air go out of her lungs. She whispered. "No, that cannot be. He'd write me letter. He say he meet me at train." "When did you get his last letter?" the man asked gently. Maria's mind raced. When had the last letter arrived? It was before they left, before they sold everything they owned to buy the train tickets. Could it have been more than 3 weeks ago? Time had been such a blur of preparations and travel. Double quote, she couldn't finish the sentence. The world seemed to be spinning around her. "Ma'am, I'm David Mackenzie. Thomas was my brother." Maria stared at him in shock. This was Thomas's brother, the one he had mentioned in his letters. Thomas had written about David, saying he was a good man who helped run the ranch when Thomas got busy. "Your brother? Really?" David nodded sadly. "Heart attack. Happened very suddenly. He went to bed one night and just didn't wake up." He paused, looking at her with sympathy. "I've been going through his things, trying to settle his affairs. I found some letters in his desk, but I didn't know he had made arrangements with someone." Maria felt like the ground was falling away beneath her. Thomas was dead. The man who had promised to take care of them, to give them a new life, was gone. They had traveled all this way for nothing. Worse than nothing, they were now stranded in a foreign country with no money, no contacts, and nowhere to go. "Mama?" Sophia's weak voice broke through her panic. "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" Maria hadn't even realized tears were running down her face. It felt warm at first, but then quickly turned cold on her cheeks. David was watching this scene with obvious distress. "Ma'am, I know this is terrible news, but we need to get you and your children somewhere warm right now. You can worry about everything else later, but first, you need to survive the night." "But where we go?" Maria asked, her voice breaking. "Have no money, no place. We know no one." "We'll figure something out," David said firmly, "but not here. Not like this." He looked at the children, and his expression softened even more. "How long have they been out in this cold?" "Since 11 o'clock last night," David swore under his breath. It's over 6 hours. They need medical attention. He knelt down next to Sophia. Hey there, sweetheart. Can you wiggle your toes for? Me, Sophia tried, but shook her head. I can't feel them. David looked very worried. He turned to Miguel. What about you, buddy? How are your hands and feet? Miguel held up his hands. His fingers looked pale and waxy in the lantern light. David's jaw tightened. We need to get them to the hospital. Now, stood up and looked at Maria. I have a truck just up the hill. Can you walk? Maria tried to stand, but her legs were so stiff and cold that she nearly fell down. David caught her arm. Okay, we're going to have to do this differently. He picked up Miguel, who was so exhausted he didn't even protest being carried by a stranger. Can you manage your daughter? Maria lifted Sophia, though it took all her remaining strength. The little girl felt frighteningly light and cold as they made their way slowly up the hill toward David's truck. Maria's mind was reeling. Thomas was dead. The life he had promised them didn't exist. They were completely alone in a strange country. But this man, this David, was helping them. Thomas's brother was risking his own safety to save theirs, even though he had no obligation to them at all. Why? She asked as they walked. Why you help us? David was quiet for a moment. Because my brother would have wanted me to, he said finally. And because it's the right thing to do. When they reached his truck, David helped them all get inside and turned the heater on full blast. The warm air felt like heaven after hours. In the freezing cold, as they drove toward the hospital, Maria stared out the window at the small town waking up in the early morning light. Everything looked different than she had imagined. This was supposed to be the beginning of their new life. But instead, it felt like the end of everything. She had no idea that the man driving them to safety was about to change their lives in a way she never could have imagined. The hospital was small but warm, and Maria had never been so grateful for heat in her entire life. The doctors took Sophia and Miguel right away, checking their hands and feet for frostbite. Maria sat in the waiting room, still shivering even. Though she was finally inside, David had stayed with them through everything, filled out paperwork, talked to the doctors, and even bought coffee and sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria. Maria couldn't understand why this stranger was being so kind to them. The children will be fine, the doctor told them after 2 hours of tests and treatment. They were lucky. A few more hours in that cold and we might have been dealing with serious frostbite. As it is, they just need to warm up slowly and get some rest. Relief flooded through Maria's body. Her children were safe. Whatever else happened, at least they were alive. But as they left the hospital, reality hit her again. Where would they go now? She had exactly $3 in her pocket. No family, no friends, no job. She didn't even speak English well enough to ask for help properly. David seemed to read her thoughts. Let's go get some breakfast, he said. We all need food and we need to talk. They went to a small diner where the waitress knew David by name. Morning, David. These your folks visiting? Something like that, Betty. Could we get some pancakes for the kids and coffee for the adults? As Sophia and Miguel ate their first hot meal in days, Maria watched David carefully. He was patient with the children, cutting Miguel's pancakes into small pieces and asking Sophia if she needed more syrup. He didn't seem angry or upset about the situation, even though his morning had been completely disrupted by their problems. I need to explain something to you, David said quietly while the children were distracted by their food. My brother Thomas, he was a good man, but he was very lonely after his wife died. I think writing to you gave him hope for the future. Maria nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying. I've been going through his papers, trying to settle his estate. I found all your letters. He kept them in a special box on his desk. David pulled out a folded envelope from his coat pocket. This was the letter he was working on when he died. He never got to send it. With shaking hands, Maria opened the letter. Thomas's familiar handwriting filled the page, but it stopped abruptly in the middle of a sentence. He had been writing about preparations for their arrival, about buying new clothes for the children, and making sure the house was ready. The letter ended with, I cannot wait to meet you and begin our new life, Tog. Fresh tears ran down Maria's face. This man had been thinking about them, planning for them, right up until the moment he died. He was excited about you coming, David said gently. He talked about it every time I saw him. He was going to pick you up in his best truck. He had the spare bedrooms already. But now, ... double quotes, Maria couldn't finish the sentence. Now, everything has changed, David agreed. I've been thinking about that all morning while we were at the hospital. He was quiet for a long moment, watching Sophia carefully stack pieces of pancake on her fork. Miguel was drawing pictures in the syrup on his plate, making patterns with his finger. My brother made you a promise, David said finally. We promised you and your children a new life, a safe place to live, a chance to start over. He's gone. But that promise, I don't think it should die with him. Maria looked up at him, confused. What you mean? David took a deep breath, like he was about to say something that would change everything. I mean, I want to honor his commitment. Not in the same way, obviously. I'm not asking you to marry me or anything like that. But I have Thomas's house. Now, in his ranch. It's a big place, too big for one person. Maria's heart started beating faster, but she was afraid to hope. I could use help managing the house, David continued. Cooking, cleaning, keeping things organized. It's honest work, and I'd pay you a fair wage. You and the children could live there, in the rooms Thomas had prepared for you. The kids could go to school in town. Maria stared at him in shock. You want us to work for you? I want to give you the chance my brother promised you, David said. A chance to build a new life here, to get on your feet, to become independent. You wouldn't be trapped or dependent on me forever. Or maybe start your own business, whatever you choose. But why? Maria whispered. You don't know us. We are strangers. We bring you only problems. David was quiet for a moment, watching Miguel, who had looked up from his plate and was listening carefully, even though he probably didn't understand all the English words. You want to know the truth? David said. I've been lonely too since Thomas died. That big house feels empty. And seeing you and your children at that train station, fighting so hard to survive, fighting to stay together, ... He shook his head. It reminded me that there are more important things than being comfortable and safe. He looked directly at Maria. Thomas saw something in your letters that made him believe you were worth taking a chance on. I read those same letters this morning. You're a mother who sold everything she owned to give her children a better life. You're someone who waited in freezing cold for 6 hours rather than give up hope. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Sophia had stopped eating and was staring at David with wide eyes. Would we really have our own rooms? She asked in her careful English. David smiled at her. Yes, you would. Your own rooms and warm beds, and all the hot soup you could want. Miguel clapped his hands excitedly. And can I keep my horse? He held up the small wooden toy. Of course. You can keep your horse. Maybe we could get you some real horses to visit too. Would you like that? Both children looked at their mother with pleading eyes. Maria felt overwhelmed. This was so much more than she had dared to hope for, even in her wildest dreams. Not just survival, but dignity. Not just shelter, but a real home. Not just charity, but honest work and fair pay. I don't understand, she said, tears starting again. People are not this kind to strangers. Maybe they should be, David said simply. Look, I'm not doing this just to be nice. I genuinely need help with the house and the ranch. Thomas managed everything by himself, but I'm not as organized as he was. You'd be helping me as much as I'd be helping you. He leaned forward slightly. But I want you to know this isn't a trap or a trick. If you say yes, you'll have your own space, your own privacy. You'll be an employee, not a servant. Children will be safe and free to be children. And when you're ready to move on, when you've saved enough money and learned enough English to be truly independent, you'll be free to go with my blessing. Maria looked at her children, who were watching her with hope in their eyes for the first time in months. Then she looked at this man who was offering them something she had never expected, not just survival, but respect. 6 months had passed since that terrible night at the train station, and Maria sometimes had to remind herself that it had really happened. Standing in the warm kitchen of what was now her home, watching Sophia help Miguel with his homework at the big wooden table, It felt like a different lifetime. The house was everything Thomas had promised in his letters and more. It was a large, comfortable ranch house with wide windows that looked out over rolling hills and pastures. The kitchen always smelled like fresh bread or soup simmering on the stove. The living room had that big stone fireplace David had told them about, and on cold evenings, they would all gather around it. But the best part wasn't the house itself, it was how it had become a real home. Maria had learned so much in these 6 months. Her English had improved dramatically from daily conversations with David and the townspeople. She could now handle all the shopping, talk to the children's teachers, and even help customers when they came to buy cattle from the ranch. The work was exactly what David had promised, honest and fair. She managed the household, cooked meals, and helped with ranch paperwork. David treated her like a valued employee, always asking her opinion and never making her feel like she was just the help. When she made mistakes with English or didn't understand something about American customs, he was patient and kind about explaining things. Sophia was thriving at the local school. She had made friends quickly and was already reading at grade level. In English, her teacher said she was one of the brightest students in the class. At home, she had become David's shadow, following him around the ranch and asking endless questions about the animals. Miguel had grown 2 inches and gained 15 pounds. The thin, worried little boy who had clutched his wooden horse on that frozen night was now a healthy, laughing child who raced around the pastures and helped feed the horses. He still carried his wooden horse everywhere, but now it had companions, toy trucks, and books and art supplies that David had bought him. The transformation in the children amazed Maria every day. They laughed freely now, played games, asked for second helpings at dinner. They slept peacefully through the night without nightmares. They had become children again. Instead of tiny adults worried about survival, but Maria's own transformation was just as remarkable. She had learned to drive David's old pickup truck. She had opened her first bank account and was slowly building savings. She was taking English classes 2 evenings a week at the community center. Most importantly, she had learned to believe in herself again. Tonight was special because David had asked to talk with her after the children went to bed. He had seemed thoughtful and slightly nervous all day, which was unusual for him. Maria wondered if he was going to tell her about changes to their arrangement. Maybe he was getting married and wouldn't need her help anymore, the thought made. Her stomach twisted with worry. After Sophia and Miguel were tucked into their beds, real beds, with thick blankets and soft pillows, Maria found David sitting by the fireplace with 2 cups of coffee, waiting on the side table. "Sit down, Maria. There's something important I need to discuss with you." Maria's heart started beating faster as she sat down across from him. "Is something wrong? Are you not happy with my work?" "Oh, no, nothing like that," David said quickly. "You've been wonderful. Better than I ever expected. The house runs so smoothly now, and the kids, ... Double quotes. He smiled. Thomas would have loved those kids. They've brought so much life to this place. Maria felt relief, but she was still nervous about what he wanted to talk about. "I've been thinking a lot lately about our arrangement," David continued. "When I first offered you this job, I said it was temporary, that once you got on your feet, learned English, saved some money, you'd probably want to move on. Here it comes," Maria thought. "He's going to ask us to leave." "But over these past months, something unexpected has happened," David said, his voice gentle. "You and the children have become, well, you've become family to me." Maria blinked in surprise, but that wasn't what she had expected him to say. "I know this might sound crazy," David continued, "but I can't imagine this house without you all in it anymore. When I come home from working in the fields and hear Sophia practicing piano or Miguel laughing in the yard, it makes everything feel right." He leaned forward slightly. "I've been talking to my lawyer about something. I want to make sure you and the children have real security here, not just a job that could end any time, but a permanent place to belong." Maria's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I want to adopt Sophia and Miguel if you'll let me." "I want you to stay here as long as you want. Not as my employee, but as part of my family." The words hit Maria like a thunderbolt. She stared at David, unable to speak. "I know this is a lot to think about," David said quickly. "I'm not asking you to marry me or anything like that. This isn't about romance, it's about family.
You're
An amazing mother, and I would never try to replace you or take over raising your children. But I love those kids like they were my own nephew and niece, and I want to make sure they always have someone to take care of them. Tears started rolling down Maria's face. Happy tears this time. There's something else, David said, pulling some papers from the side table. I've been working with an immigration lawyer for months. These are the papers to help you get permanent residency. You don't have to worry about being sent back to your home country anymore. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. Maria couldn't stop crying. All those months of worry, of wondering if this was too good to be true, of waiting for the other shoe to drop, and instead, David was offering them something even more incredible than she had dared to dream. Why? She whispered, the same question she had asked him that first night. Why would you do this for us? David was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire, because Thomas believed in taking care of people who needed help, because I've learned that a house isn't a home unless it's filled with people you care about, and because you and those children have given me something I didn't even know I was missing. He looked directly at her. You've given me a family, Maria, a real family. Sophia calls me Uncle David now, and Miguel asks me to help him with his math homework. You make sure I eat properly and don't work too late. For the first time since Thomas died, I'm not lonely anymore. Maria thought about that terrified woman who had waited in the freezing cold 6 months ago, holding her children and praying for a miracle. She had been looking for safety and survival. Instead, she had found something infinitely better: love, belonging, and hope for the future. The children, she said through her tears. What will they think? David smiled. I already asked them. Miguel said, does this mean we get to stay forever? And Sophia said, can I still call you Uncle David even if you're our dad too? Maria laughed and cried at the same time. Of course, her children had already figured it out. They were smart kids who had learned to recognize real love when they saw it. As she looked around the warm, comfortable room at the family photos, on the mantle that now included pictures of her and the children, at Miguel's drawings hanging on the refrigerator, at Sophia's school projects displayed proudly on the bookshelf, Maria realized that sometimes the most inconceivable thing of all is how much better life can be than you ever imagined possible.